Hello, Midnight TCG members. This is Midnight Fox coming to you with Competitive Edge podcast. This week we have Jim Zaki recording. We have our local Birdman Nomad with us tonight.
Hey guys.
And we have Eddie Phoenix.
I'm Robert Jabba Juba. Everybody.
And
all right.
Tonight we're going to be talking about pyro monsters. So for all you pyromaniacs, cheesy joke, we're going to be going over possibly one of your favorite archetypes. I know it's Keo's. So first of all, start this out going with Nomad. What are your thoughts on pyro as an overall type?
As an overall type, I think it's one of the smaller types that we have. I was just flipping through a binder of mine, and I only had like a page and a half of fire and pyro monsters that I had in there, as far as interesting commons from back in the day. But I think that it's one of those types that we have a few small monsters that are really good, and oddly enough, only a few of them actually fit the burn theme. Like, I'm thinking of like Raging Flame Sprite, and I believe Solar Flare Dragon is possibly a pyro. I could be wrong on that.
Yes.
He is? Okay,
yes.
so... Oh, I guess we got two of them out there. There are a few more that I think we'll cover along the way, but I also think Molten Zombie is a heck of a cool card to start things off. If nothing else, because it's a nice episode of The Walking Dead, which didn't really feature a lot of fire, but it's about zombies, and zombies are cool, and this is kind of our segue into the best show on television right now.
Insert Nomad's plug of The Walking Dead.
Hey, I have to. We had the mid-season finale. A lot of stuff happened. A lot of stuff is going to happen in a few months, and it really sucks we have to wait that long, but in the meantime, we have Yu-Gi-Oh! And we have a lot of good Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm always excited when new Pyro monsters come out, just because, again, it's one of the smaller types that we have to do with. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a lot to say right now on it, except that it's, I don't know, guys, it's a cool archetype. If we want to call it that, but yeah, unless we're going to get into specific monsters here, it's there's not much I got really.
What about you, Eddie?
For me, it's one of those types that has all those wacky cards in it, and if you build a deck solely based for it and around it, it's hard to support pyros otherwise.
I think I'm going to have to agree with you on there. I really like pyros. As Nomad said, it is a lowly supported archetype, as in there's not a whole lot of pyro monsters out there. But pyros within themselves, I think, are interesting monsters, as most of them are actually burn monsters, and personally I like burn, and for anybody just getting into the game, I always suggest right now starting with burn, just because it is slower paced and you can easily get stopped trying to go with an aggressive deck. So definitely to newer players, I would steer them to look at pyros, even though there are less monsters. There are pretty consistent builds within the pyro type to run in a burn deck. I mean, pyros are not there completely to burn, but that's what the majority of them do. So, with that, I'll move on to our next question. Nomad, what do you think are some helpful pyro monsters?
I mean, I already mentioned, I guess, the Raging Flame Sprite, but I mean, as far as the really cool monsters and the really helpful ones, and the one that really kind of make me think of them, I'm gonna have to go with Thestalos, the Fire Monarch. I've ran Monarchs in the past quite a bit, and I've always kind of been on the fence about him. I like how he's one of the more unique ones in that he has a randomized discard. So, I mean, I don't really know if I'd run it right now in a Monarch build, but every time our meta has a lot of shifting, I look at him because of that, and it also does a bit of burn damage too, which is neat. Especially because it isn't an effect that a lot of us actually think about, and I'm kind of a fan of those like auxiliary or secondary things. And then again, another really helpful monster in the Pyro. I'm gonna have to go with I guess Royal Firestorm Guards, as I know Eddie's gonna want to talk a lot about.
Yep.
It's one of those cards that I look at and I see a lot of potential, and honestly, all that I see is holding it back is that you have to have a lot of pyros in order to make it a worthy card, and it's all potential as far as I see.
I kind of agree. You know, going back to Thestalos first, when you go over him, I think he might have been more effective last format with Dark Worlds and Chaos Dragons running rampant for a secondary effect, but I do like his discard effect, and like I said, the secondary effect is forgotten a lot, but just creating hand advantage, Thestalos can be good for that. There are better options, but he's still a cheap option to look at if you're looking to run a Monarch build. And on Royal Firestorm Guards, I mean,
it's Pot of Greed that has legs, and
exactly.
Even like Thestalos, who you think, well, what I like about him is that he makes your opponent want to play cards on the field rather than keep them in the hand, and that kind of plays to all your other Monarchs, especially Mobius, which is kind of a neat balance of fire and water there. If you're like me, look at that kind of stuff. But I think there's a lot more in and behind and around Royal Firestorm Guards that eventually it's going to become a card that we see play with.
Yeah, I tried to use it more when it first came out, and I mean it was really good with like the Volcanic Rocket combo, and a lot of people like to use it for that. But for me, just like I said, it's like a Pot of Avarice, except it's specific to Pyros, and it can give you hand advantage. So, I mean, if we start getting more Pyro support, I think that definitely could see more play. And I mean, the way they really rolled out the water monsters with the water structure deck and Abyss Rising, I could see a later set coming out that would offer more support to fire. So, I mean, it would be great to see more Pyro monsters. What else? Nomad?
What else? I like Uria, the Lord of Searing Flames. That's if I'm gonna look at the type and pick my favorite monster, or the monster that I see the most most a fan wank or most energy in, it's easily Uria, Lord of Searing Flames. It's kind of a hard card to go and justify as being like a meta focus, especially now that our game mechanic rulings have been changed, of where you can no longer activate ignition effects in response to summons, and that plays in Uria's disadvantage, because before you could make your normal summon, you could activate your effect, and they couldn't chain to it, which would mean if they had like a Bottomless Trap Hole or a Torrential Tribute, you would get around it. But nowadays you don't have the option, so it's like you're making your big play, you're taking that risk of getting rid of your 3 continuous traps that were holding your opponent back. You're playing your big monster, and all they have to do is play a bottomless and you lose. But
And, I mean, when they released, like, the actual 3 playable gods, it
well, yeah,
kind of
that's
took down the playability of the sacred beasts.
yeah, but see,
Because-
Uria is still the one though that you can still play your continuous traps. Like you still have your stuff like your fiendish chains and and your safe zones, and one of my favorites, which is a pole position in that kind of deck. You still have those, which will get you advantage as you play them and be kind of remain. Whereas all the other ones, like with Iravael or whatever, you had to summon it by using 3 fiends, so you had to have 3 monsters. And then for Hammond, you had to have 3 continuous
Spells.
spell cards. Yeah, spell cards. So I mean, you could justify it in Crystal Beasts, I guess, too. But Uria was always really the one that really grabbed me, and I don't know. Always liked it. Always kind of thought it was kind of a strong flagship card, even if it had its number of setbacks behind it.
The one thing I do like about Uriah is that you cannot activate things in response to his effect. So, I mean, a lot of people like to chain and
Oh, for sure.
from destroying. Uriah doesn't allow that. Because
Yeah, so I mean, yeah. So if they have like a Fiendish Chain, well, I guess a Fiendish Chain you lose regardless. But I mean, if they have like an MST or something down, they're gonna have to play that prior, which means you'll pick a different target.
They can't
And
play Wabaku.
that's true. They can't play the Wabaku, and
it is a good
So-
way of forcing your opponent's hand. I mean, like I
Yeah.
said, they can't activate whatever you're destroying in response.
so what they're gonna do is you'll make them play earlier than they would normally want to, when you give yourself more information about the game state. And if you're losing 3 of your own cards, any advantage you can get from that is good. But I mean, ideally, you're gonna win very soon after playing it, because it'll be at least a 3,000, if not, it's 4 or 5,000 if you're a bit of a late game.
So what about you, Eddie? What do you think are some helpful pyro type monsters?
Okay, if I'm gonna go by just their pyro types as helpful, Flame Ruler. If you're gonna throw in Flame Ruler into almost any pyro or fire type deck, being able to sacrifice him to be able to throw down a monster that requires 2 tributes, hey, that's a good tribute, or good thing to have for tribute. I do agree with Nomad on Raging Flame Sprite, because you can throw down a Swords Revealing Light and just go, I poke you, I go up to 1100. I poke you again, I go up to 2100. I poke you again and go up to 3100. What do you do now? If you're running a endless loop to where you're able to properly run it, Foxfire during the end phase, if this card were destroyed by battle, and this turn was face up at the start of the damage step, special summon it from the graveyard. If you're able to make it to where you can just set it and then Book of Teo it, you'd be able to make it to where somehow you can shift and then have your opponent swing at it and hit it. And
Well, it's a good way.
Targeting thing.
It's a good way with Cylinder being at 3 and us having 3 dimension walls to do damage to your opponent, and if you happen to have a solar flare out, creates a lock.
Yes.
Can't attack your solar flare, so you're still going to get to burn with that, and you can keep bringing it back, keep them from being able to attack that solar flare until you get another one out. Of course,
And if
Well-
you're able to play Backfire with it, you can do 500 damage each time they hit it and send it to the graveyard and bring it back.
I have a question though. Like all of this is neat, but like I always have issues of like, if Watts do it better. Like if I'm gonna go with like an aggressive burn deck, why wouldn't I run Watts? Because I'm getting 1,000 damage every turn, plus my card advantage,
True.
and then I have drafts too. So it's like I want to run the Flame Sprite and Solar Flare, but it almost eats at me because I'm like, well, if Watts can do it better, then what do I have on the Pyro side to offer me that Watts don't?
Well, and when we actually get to Thunder, I think that's going to be a good one to cover if you're looking at running burn decks, especially with the much anticipated Thunder Seahorse
Yeah.
running into the Watt deck. So, but yeah, we'll save that for the Thunder Archetype. But
Well, it's still comparative. I mean, like if I'm looking at running any kind of deck or any kind of idea, I always want to ask myself, what can this do better than a similar option, or what can this offer me better than, or what can this offer me in general? And it's only natural to compare it to something similar, right?
yep.
If I'm gonna throw out another card, if you really want to run one of those heal decks, so to speak, where you're just doing nothing but gaining life points, Fire Princess. Love that little card because just I gain life, you lose life. I gain life, you lose life.
Old school.
Yes.
I totally forgot about her, and I always loved that. Especially with stuff like Solemn Wishes and Golden Ladybug, and you can be like, yeah.
Of
Well-
course. Oh, go ahead.
So, go ahead.
No, I was just bringing it up because like I'm thinking of if I want to gain life points consistently and do burn damage, it's kind of neat, right? Because like Golden Ladybug is every turn you gain 500 life points, and with Princess out, you'd be burning them, wouldn't you? Like, isn't that how she works?
You got to repeat that one more time because I was like half in, half out on that conversation.
Okay, so on Fire Princess, is it whenever you gain life points, it does 500 damage to the opponent, correct?
It says each time you gain life points, it inflicts 500 damage to your opponent.
Okay, so then wouldn't you want something that would consistently gain you life points, like
I would
Solemn
think-
Wishes or Golden Ladybug?
Yeah.
I would
If
think
you were
stuff
taking that
like
route.
Or running like a Prime Material Dragon to reverse burn your opponent.
If you really wanted to, you could do something like Bad Reaction to Samachi, and then just like, I'm trying to burn myself, at the same time I'm going to heal myself, and then,
You have Nurse Burn then, and you have Nurse Burn, and that gets away from Pyros.
yeah. Nurse Refuel, yeah, that'll do it.
And then you have Dark Snake Syndrome too,
Yeah.
which is hella cool. I love that card. It's almost Pyro.
If you want to do another card that would be effective to maybe run in a deck, this is if you just want to make it so where you can juice up a Pyro card. That would be Gaia Soul, the Combustible Collective. You can tribute up to 2 Pyro-type monsters. If you do, this card gains attack equal to the number of tributed monsters by 1,000. During battle between this card and a defense position card, whose defense is lower than the attack, inflict the difference as battle damage to your opponent, and then destroy the card at the end of the turn. You can get it for because you're going to be able to tribute up to 2 Pyro-type monsters. You can get it up to 4,000, and for one turn be able to do piercing damage and then destroy it. And if you really wanted to, because a lot of the Pyro-type monsters are either level 4 or they have 200 defense, you can drop a Rekindling and then start pulling back a lot of those monsters, and either A, synchro summoning the fire types that all come back with that, or B, use the Rekindling as food to be able to use Gaia Soul and sacrifice it to it, and then if you wanted to like exceed summon, you could.
I think he'd be a good tech card against like running into Gachi Gachi. That is a troublesome card for a level 2 right now. So Gaiasoul would definitely be a good one. Yes, if they have 2 units attached, he's at 2200. But yeah, if you tribute 2 Pyro type monsters, you got a 4000. Or even if you only tribute 1,
Yep.
he goes
And
up 3000.
Or just play a Volcanic Queen.
Yeah.
And you get to remove a unit, and then when it's supposed to destroy him, all their units are gone. So you can use up their units on Gachi Gachi in 1 turn with Gaiasoul. So yeah, I could see him being a tech card.
And then if you're like me and you like to run macro stuff a lot, you're going to be running the Helios trio. Helios, the Primordial Sun, Helios Duo Megistus, and then Helios Tris Megistus. You're running those 3 and just going whoosh, whoosh, whoosh.
And even more points if you can pronounce them. Because I just call them Helios, Fat Helios, and the Big Helios. That's the way I kind of get.
The Helios trio actually was a pretty decent set of cards, but a lot of people just breeze over the playability factor, and I think that mainly has to do with as much spell and trap destruction as we have available, and of course they rely on macro to get out there. But if you
I'll use the first one.
They can be annoying.
Well, I mean, like, I use the first one. If I'm playing 3 copies of Macrocosmos, I'll run the first one. Like, I'll run a single copy of the... What is it? Primordial Sun? The one that Macro summons?
Helios, the Primordial Sun.
Yeah, because, like, I'll run, like, one of that if I run 3 copies of Macrocosmos. And then... Mathematically speaking, I will draw the macro and play the macro before I ever draw the Helios. So... I mean, I can have a free monster when I play macro, and that kind of helps me justify running macro over Dimensional Fissure, or even alongside it. And then I'll sacrifice it, you know, for Thestalos, and then right back in the frying pan.
Well, for me, kind of what I find helpful. And I would really, like I said, beginning players, I would direct them at Pyros. First of all, I just want to put 3 into a combo that is a fairly consistent burn deck. Is a Volcanic Slicer. He's level 4, 1800. You can do 500 burn damage instead of attacking, which means you can just sit back and burn him if you got level limiter. Gravity Bind, yes. Xyz monsters can get past that, but it's a good wall to put out there to protect like your solar flares that still gives you the ability to burn. And if you're running a burn deck, it's a good opening card to get out if you get first turn, so you can still do damage. Into that, Scatter Shot, when it's sent to the graveyard, you do 500 damage. So it doesn't matter if it gets sent by Foolish, Morphing Jar, what have you. It does 500 damage regardless. And the last one going with those, and this is just my little combo that goes with like Solar Flares, so on, and Lava Golems in the burn deck that I built for my son, just to get him to get the concepts of the game, is Volcanic Counter. By far one of my favorite cards. If you get the field set up right and you get the life points set up right, you could put your opponent into a lock. It was my saving grace back before Synchros and Xyz that against Light Swarm would put my opponents into locks. I could have them have to mill away their deck and they couldn't attack because I had their life points dwindled down so much. And it's a stacking effect. So If you have more than one in there, they all get removed at the same time, and your opponent takes the same amount of damage. Of course, if they've got a small monster, yeah, they can hit you with that small one. But if you set the deck up right, it's a fairly consistent combo. And more recently, my last one that I would think would be helpful, Pyro, is Daigusto Phoenix. If you don't want to run Gachi, he's a wind monster. It's 2 level 2 monsters. Once per turn, you get to detach an Xyz material monster from that card. And then you get to choose a wind monster, and it can attack twice during each battle phase. So you can even target itself, and you get to attack twice for 1,500 with it. So I would think that would be more contemporary, and I've seen it used a lot more. But it's a good little Pyro Xyz, and if you don't want to go with Gachi, it's a good alternative to Gachi. So the next one is Nomad. What Pyro type monsters do you think are overlooked?
I'm gonna have to come back to Royal Firestorm Guards here, and I think it's overlooked. I mean, it's overlooked because right now it's not very useful in light of the low amount of Pyros, but I mean, as far as looking into our future and looking at our current monsters, like I look at a card like a Thestalos, you know, and Uria, and like Raging Flame Sprite and Molten Zombie, and these are all cool. But honestly, I really don't see him getting a whole lot better as the game progresses. Whereas a card like Royal Firestorm Guards, I see as having a lot more chances of being of having the it factor, of having that factor of this is a really good draw engine card. Like if you look back at cards like Destiny Draw and Lure of Darkness and all of these cards, they came out and they were cool, and then something just hit, and we all swooned into them, and even something, you know, even something like Plot of Avarice, which is probably the most comparable card in the game to Royal Firestorm Guards, it requires a lot of monsters, but all those monsters can be anything. It doesn't have to be like a water or a fire or a level 6 or anything. It's just any 5 monsters, return back to your deck and draw 2 cards. With Firestorm Guards, you have to have all 4 of them have to be Pyros or fire. I think it's Pyro though. Yeah, all 4 Pyros. So it's incredibly reliant on what the deck itself is going to offer, more of what Firestorm Guards offers. Other than that, I guess Volcanic Shell, as you guys have brought up, it's a card that I've always kind of thought was interesting and cool in the fact that it replaced itself and gave you hand advantage and graveyard presence, which again can kind of play to Firestorm Guards. But yeah, as far as overlooked cards, I'm going to stick with Royal Firestorm Guards entirely with this, to be honest. I'm surprised it isn't being talked about more.
What about you, Eddie? What do you think are some overlooked Pyro type monsters?
Well, Firestorm Guard, it's a really good card to be able to use. Nomad hit almost on all my points. Charcoal Impachi. It's one of those monsters to where, yeah, it's a 1-star, but the 2,100 defense points you're able to get from it would be a really good card to have on the side.
It's a good little shield that your opponent wouldn't see coming because it is such an old and forgotten card.
Yeah. A little bit probably going out on a limb here because I know most people who run these little monsters probably wouldn't think of these two. Elemental Hero Lady Heat and Elemental Hero Heat.
Heat, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I am with you 100%, at least on Heat, Eddie. At least on Heat.
Heat because he's able to gain 200 for each face-up Elemental Hero monster you control. That little bugger comes in handy when, also, if you want to just say screw it and Super Poly into something. And same goes for Lady Heat. if you're having a mirror match and your opponent has Neos Alias sitting on their side of the field, you've got a free Elemental Hero Nova Master just waiting to be made. If you wanted to, also you could go with the. I would say Elemental Hero Inferno, but I'd be wrong. Since we also have had the recent banning of Brionac, I'm going to go with Flamvel Uruquizas because it's a piercer and it gains 300 attack each time, inflicts battle damage to your opponent. So, level 6, poke, I gain 300, poke, I gain 300, poke, I gain 300. Are you dead yet?
That's what I like about Uruquizas, is the fact that it gains. It doesn't just pierce. So if your opponent doesn't have an answer, then he can become quite the beater very quickly.
Yeah. And then, just for rabbit's sake, Blazing Inpachi. You grab 2 Blazing Inpachi, drop them to the field, lay them over, and then woof.
It's also 1850, which is a very cool number in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yes.
And it's I also like how you mentioned on the Flamvel of the whole "Are you dead yet?" because it's one of those level 6 monsters that offers a bit of a different like. You have your Gaia Knight, and you have our Enchained Dragon, and you have your themed ones, but honestly, as far as all of our generic ones go, without Bronic, we're really going to be reaching. So having...
It's kind of comparative, if you would say, maybe to Gravity Warrior, except
yes.
where it depends on your opponent's side of the field. Whereas Uruquizas gets to pop through, do piercing damage, and he gains. So it's not just he gains whatever your opponent has on the field. It's a constant pop, gain.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I honestly don't even care about that. What I care about, though, is that it really makes your opponent, I guess, react and question a few things that they normally wouldn't question as much. And it can help you, or I've found it can help me get a better read of what my opponent actually has there if I go for Uruk opposed to Gaia.
I think the real thing people overlook him for is that he's only 2100 to start with. But that's exactly the point. It's 2100 attack to start with. And that's why he's overlooked.
And then he becomes a 23, right? Because he gains that 200 for each time he does damage, right?
300.
300.
24.
So 24.
Okay.
And
So yeah, so even better, yeah. Even better. So it'll be 24 after your first attack, and if you get your first attack off, then it's on his job. If you don't get your first attack off, then it's irrelevant what you played.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
2 turns, and he runs over Utopia.
Yeah.
Well, in theory, because Utopia will just negate the attack, and then... But, I know what you're saying, though. 25 is kind of a... You know, a bar number in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Once you get over that mark, I think that's become the new benchmark. It used to be 2400, because like Jinzo and all your Monarchs and everything set at 2400, and now 2500 is the new mark to get over. And I think that's why more people look at like Gaia Knight and Gravity Warrior, is to get that initial pop over 2500.
I like Gaia Knight, though, but I also like having another option, especially if my deck isn't entirely reliant on using all 15 of the spots. Like, if I'm playing Black Wings, okay, fine. I guess in Black Wings I can justify not running it because I have Arm Wing, but I mean, if I'm running... Yeah, I mean, say if I'm running a Monarch deck, you know, maybe I'm running Thestalos in that Monarch deck. Okay, so then maybe I'm not going to care too much about my spots. Well, if I'm running Effect Veiler, right, or even any kind of tuner, like I ran Gale, to be honest, in one of the Monarch builds I had. So if I'm even running a small option of having a level 6, why wouldn't I want to look at all my options in there? Even if I use them like 1 out of like 20 games. Like I've won games from that.
2 of each level, 5, 6, 7, and 8. when I use a synchro mostly in my side deck. And then that leaves for like your regular Xyz monsters that are going to be your staples. But for me, it's still a little hard to switch over from synchros to Xyz. I mean, that was kind of like everybody was used to their regular decks, and when synchros first got released, everybody's like, I'm never going to play those cards. They're so stupid.
Exactly, and then, yeah. It's,
and then, wow. Synchros became, that's what threw huge speed into the game, was just the ability to pop out special summon monsters like mad fast.
Mm-hmm.
And the cool thing is now that we have both of those types, and we have revivals of like fusion and ritual monsters and stuff too. So it's not even it's become a much more abundant game as far as what's a resource and what isn't, and like where we get that fire from during our game.
Well, for me,
Wait,
I'm going to go... Oh, you got another one, Eddie?
I've got one more because of it being able to be targeted by Rekindling. And it being
Rekindling?
Yes. I'm going to go with, because it takes one Fire-type tuner and one non-tuner Pyro-type monster, going to have to go with Ancient Flamveiled Deity. When this card is synchronous summon, remove from play cards from your opponent's graveyard up to the number of cards in their hand. This card gains 200 attack for each card removed from play by this effect. It comes out with that magical little number of 2,500 to start, and it's able to gain 200 depending on how many cards your opponent is holding in hand.
Yeah, so if they have like 3 cards...
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, well, I was just going to say, even if you go with, like, you remove 2 cards, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's an extra 400, so it'll be at 2,900. And then you're also removing 2 cards out of the graveyard.
So there goes maybe Chaos Food.
Yeah, and,
Dark Arm Dragon, Christia, you can shut down a lot of engines by having removal ability.
And
Well,
plus,
see-
like I said... Oh, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was going to say that even if you don't care about one of the effects, you still have the other. So it's not... So it's... I mean, I would still favor something like a DD Crow over it if you're specifically wanting. But I mean, if that is playing into your theme already of playing Rekindling, then
Mm-hmm.
you don't even have to outsource those kind of cards.
Yep.
Well, for the Fox, I'm going to go a little weird possibly to you. Overlooked for me in Pyros, I'm going to start off by going with Tinkabito Shien. He's basically a Pyro Wild Heart. He's unaffected by the effects of trap cards, which means you can't bottomless him, you can't hit him with Mirror Force, you can't hit him with Torrential. If you're running a Pyro deck, it's a good way to get around a lot of destruction cards. And he's a level 4, so he's going to be easier to keep out on the field if you're an Xyz player to get into your level 4 Xyz summons. And if you use Call of the Haunted to bring him back, he's not destroyed. So, I mean, definitely a good thing to look at there. And he's 1,500 or less, so you could actually use Inferno Reckless Summon with him for a 1-turn Shockmaster.
There you go.
My second one, like I said, I'm going to go a little weird, and this is just looking at instant fusion. In the Age of Xyz monsters and synchros, I'm going to say Sherivan the Fire Knight. He's a level 3 fusion, instant fusion. If you got another level 3 out on the field, or you have a level 3 in hand, he's easy to go into Zenmaines, Leviair, Leviathan, number 30, any of the overpowered rank 3s, which seem to be where most of your power cards are. Your 4s are pretty good, but most of the broken cards are actually within your rank 3 in the Xyz. So right now, I would say Sheridan is overlooked. It might be a good side deck item to look at, just for 1,000 life points, instant fusion summon into a Zen mains. And then once he's there, he goes to your graveyard. You can still bring him back and go into other rank 3 Xyz monsters. Since he became an overlay unit, he goes to the graveyard, so.
You know what else he does? You know what else he does? He hatches from an egg.
He what?
He hatches from an egg. You know, because if you look at the standard material monsters that he uses, it's Monster Egg and Hinotama Soul. And Monster Egg is an egg, and Hinotama Soul is like a flame.
Which one came first, the chicken or the egg?
The flame or the egg?
I guess kind of round out the Fox's overlooked, and I just look at the ease of summoning with this, and its ability and attack would be Blaze Phoenix, the Burning Bombardment Bird. It's one machine type monster, one pyro type monster. No specifics. So, running into like the Malefic Skill Drain, definitely a possibility of having it there if you're running a pyro deck, or to be able to use your opponent's field to get this guy out. And once per turn during your main phase, you get to do 300 damage to your opponent for each card on the field, but you can't attack with him. Personally, I really wouldn't use that effect, considering he's a 2800 beater and 2300 defense. So even if they pop him with a Book of Moon of enemy controller, he's still good for putting up a defensive wall. But at 2800, he's going to get over most of the monsters out there, and he's easily summoned. I like the monsters in the fusion area that where they're going now, at the fusion area where it's not so specific. Makes them easier to get out. I think that's what Konami looks at, is they don't want to lose any of their cash cows anywhere, so they're trying to make sure that they still support fusions, even though they're really pushing Xyz now. They're still releasing synchros, even though they're really pushing Xyz. They don't want any area of that extra deck to really go away. I mean, going back to where we were talking about in Psychic's Ultimate Axon Kicker, and how broken that card is. And it's a fusion monster.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that would be my third one, Blaze Phoenix. And, like I said, just the ease of summon and how high his attack is. It's easy to make your opponent waste their Xyz units with Utopia. So, with that, going to move on to Nomad. And what are some of the best Pyro decks you remember, or if not Pyro, supported by Pyro?
I'm gonna go back to Uria, and it's kind of funny of how Eddie brought up Elemental Hero Heat, because like one of the engines I had going in that was actually to have Elemental Hero Heat and Emergency Call. And the reasoning there is I wanted to have a lot of Pyro monsters in that deck because of Royal Firestorm Guards, and I was trying to kind of make all go into one unit. And it's arguably even more playable now because of Gemini Spark and things that we didn't have back then. And we also have a lot more control cards that are continuous traps that are useful on their own. I mean, I could still run stuff like Fairy Box because, I mean, let's be honest here, this Fairy Box is hilarious. But with like all the fiendish chains I could be running and things, I have more potential now. Other than that, I mean, if you want to count Rekindling, rekindling and pretty much anything Flamvel based or involved is going to be pretty good. It was one of our best, like, Flamvel Cat was one of the best decks for quite a while, so, I mean, it's got to count for something. And yeah, I've liked the Thestalos a little bit, but I'm not really going to count that, because, I mean, it's one card, and unless you're going to run stuff like Volcanic Shells in there too, it's not really a Pyro deck, so I mean, I have to go with probably the Flamvel stuff and/or Uria, even if the latter of which is a bit of my own fan wank in there too. But
Well, shells and rockets, and something that I didn't even realize that I guess when Konami took it over that they errataed. I remember back when UDE ran it, you could not search Tri-Blaze with Volcanic Rocket, but now you can. So if you've already got a Blaze Accelerator and going into that engine, you have a way to mess with your opponent's field with Rocket and darn it.
yeah, I know what you're saying. I honestly don't remember this stuff well enough to comment, but yeah, if they've made a change to one of the cards to where it can give you a wider search field, I'm all for it.
Well, I was actually in a match, and I was like, no, you can't search that, it says that, and it says you only, you can get a Blaze Accelerator. Then I actually looked up the ruling on it, and it has changed. Now you can search the Tri-Blaze. So, yeah.
It's probably because it was meant to read a Blaze Accelerator card, which would mean any card with Blaze Accelerator in its name, opposed to Blaze Accelerator period, as in just that specific name. That's probably what has happened here.
You gotta love all the nice little ins and outs that we get issued to us in this game.
Oh, for sure. And I'm usually pretty good at keeping up with that stuff, but honestly, on this, I have not played either of those cards in years, so I couldn't tell right now, to be honest. So it's good that you've filled us in on a cool detail. What was that?
Some of the best pyro-based or pyro completely decks you faced.
For me, I'm gonna have to go with assault mode decks. Back when they got really, really hot with the Flamvels and stuff. I mean, I understand that some of the Flamvels that were used in the deck were not pyro per se, because you had mainly it was like Fire Dog and Magician that you used a lot. But and then burn decks, of course. Burn decks.
Well, for me, I'm going to say that, like I said, I'm going to go back to Slicer, Scattershot, and counter, popping those in with Solar Flare. Just the whole burn idea, running it with some Lava Golem. And with low limit being at 3, gravity bind at 3, my son's begging me to rebuild his burn deck because it's a good starter deck, and he hasn't completely got down the whole aggressive nature of running decks like Gadgets, Blackwing. Okay, I think it got bad right about where, so we were on Eddie.
Yeah. And you were going to ask him about his favorite decks. I think is where we were.
So, what would you say is a favorite Pyro deck? So, what's the best ones you remember that you either liked playing against or using yourself?
I'm gonna have to say assault mode decks. Being able to, of course, use that rekindling engine to be able to pull back almost in all Flamvels. to synchro, and then assault mode, and then just whoosh, kill my opponent. Or just burn decks, because I'm able to set my opponent on fire and them to just go, yeah, this hurts.
And Eddie's really loving burn decks right now with Cylinder at 3.
Yes, I love Magic Cylinder being at 3. I run it in almost every deck at 3. Whee!
And for me, I'm going to have to go back to the whole counter, scatter shot, slicer, the ability to, with each of them, to burn for 500. And it's a fairly easy deck to pull off. I would definitely point beginners to a Volcanic deck. As it is an easy deck to run, it is consistent, and it does give you options. I mean, with counters are level 3s, scatter shots are level 2s, slicers are level 4s. Depending on what else you're going to toss in there, they still allow you to Z-summon. And you could go into things like number 50 Black Ship of Corn, and you can use Grinosaurus and other burn cards. So definitely going to say my favorite one with Pyro with the burn decks. And for me, going back to the Volcanics. I've been a fan of the Volcanics since they released. So, anybody have any closing thoughts on Pyros before I do a quick run through? Anything else?
I guess closing thoughts here is anyone who missed The Walking Dead in the last couple months can catch a marathon on AMC, which will, I believe it's either like a New Year's Eve or New Year's Day or something around that time. Just if you come over to our forum, I will be updating us about that as we go.
And the producers of Walking Dead are going to come visit Midnight TCG, and as much as he plugs the show for them, they're going to offer Nomad a job.
Exactly, and then I can have Robert Kirkman on the Midnight TCG podcast. And that'd be awesome, actually. I would love that. It'll never happen, but, you know,
So
I'd be down
I
with
guess to kind of end things out, welcome Thought Mage to the team. He's in the Magic section now. You guys have an idea of what the Flash tournament's going to be all about on Thursday? Make sure that you're on there. The Fox is getting to be a creature of habit, so cough, cough.